Professor Mario Livio is a distinguished astrophysicist and best-selling author, formerly a senior astrophysicist at the Space Telescope Science Institute, the Scientific Operations Center for the Hubble Space Telescope. His scientific research has profound seminal contributions to the theory of accretion disks, binary star evolution, type 1a supernova, and the search for the life in the universe. Livio's theoretical models have deepened humanity's understanding of how compact objects like white dwarfs and black holes interact with their environments to produce the most energetic events in the cosmos and the search for extraterrestrial life. Beyond his technical achievements, Livio is a globally recognized intellectual who bridges the gap between hard science, mathematics, and philosophy. Through influential works such as The Golden Ratio and The Brilliant Blunders, he explores the epistemic nature of discovery and the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in describing reality. A fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, Livio combines rigorous theoretical astrophysics with a profound capacity to articulate the beauty and complexity of the universe in a simple language. So with this brief introduction, I would like to invite Professor Mario to deliver his lecture. Just to let all of you know that Mario is also a regular contributor to our Institute's foundational quest for knowing the absolute truth. Sir, I request you to please take over the session and deliver your talk.
Okay. Is Earth exceptional? Is the topic of my talk, and it is based on this book, Is Earth Exceptional? The Quest for Cosmic Life. The book was written in collaboration with the Nobel laureate Jack Szostak. So here is me trying to put together a whole galaxy, and here is Jack, who is trying to create life in his lab. We deal with two important questions, and these are the main questions of the book and of this talk. First, how did life start on Earth? How did life begin here on Earth? And second, are we alone in the Milky Way, first of all, and perhaps even in the universe as a whole? These are the two main questions we try to answer in this book, and I will try to answer in some way, at least in this talk. Now, oddly enough, you may know that for hundreds of years, humans thought that they know the answers to these questions. For example, how did life start? Some deity created it. This is from Michelangelo's painting, of course, and that's how life started. What about the Milky Way? The ancient Greeks also had mythology about that. The Milky Way, they say, it was formed by Hera, the goddess, spilling milk because she didn't want to feed the baby Heracles. Now, of course, today we think of these things a bit differently, and I will start with life on Earth. Here is Earth, which is very beautiful, and therefore we should, not do anything to harm it. Then moving from Earth in terms of the search for life, I will move through the solar system. Our solar system has 4 terrestrial planets, which are rocky planets like Earth. There is Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Mercury is way too hot to ever have had anything. I will talk briefly about Venus and Mars, and like I said, I will definitely spend some time on Earth. Then we have the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. They are gas giants, so they are really not rocky planets, and we don't think there can be life on them. But they also have many moons. Jupiter has 101 known moons. Saturn has now 285 known moons. Even Uranus has 28 moons, and Neptune 16 moons. I will say a little bit about the possibility of life on some of those moons. Now, when we talk about life, um, we don't try to define life because we did not find that to be particularly useful in understanding how life started. But life is characterized by four processes that have somehow to seamlessly combine. And they are metabolism, which means that a living cell is capable of taking materials, energy from the surrounding and use those in order to do what it needs to do. There is genetics, which means there is an information system that is responsible both for processes and also for passing information from one generation to the next. There is compartmentalization, which means all life as we know it is made of cells. There are cells of life, and when we say trying to generate life in his lab, I mean really trying to make a living cell. And finally, there is catalysis, which means there are some agents that speed up and help chemical processes happening. And we need for all of that to somehow happen together. Now, for many years, and I really mean many years, many decades, there was a serious problem that was regarded as perhaps being insurmountable. And that is that when you look at modern life today, you find that it is extremely self-referential or recursive. What I mean by that is that, for example, to do life, is made of those information system, DNA, RNA, and then it's made of proteins. And to make proteins, you need DNA because that really gives all the information and all the orders how to do it and so on. But to make DNA, you need all kinds of catalysts, which are themselves enzymes, which are proteins. So to make proteins, you need DNA. To make DNA, you need proteins. So this is a bit like this Escher drawing of one hand drawing the other. And this was seen as a very difficult problem because obviously it creates serious chicken or egg problems. What came first, the chicken or the egg? This problem was eventually solved, excuse me, when two scientists, Thomas Cech and Sidney Altman, discovered that RNA actually can also work as a protein enzyme. This was a momentous discovery. RNA, which is an information molecule, also can work as an enzyme, which is a protein. So what that meant was that RNA could be the chicken and the egg, if you like. And this led to the idea of the RNA world, which means that life on Earth, excuse me, this is early in the morning for me, so I'm a little bit still, my voice is not fully warmed up. It means that life on Earth could have started just with RNA, no DNA, no proteins, just RNA, because RNA could work both as the information and as the protein enzyme. Now, this idea is fantastic because this means that if I want to understand the origin of life on Earth, it is enough perhaps to understand the origin of RNA. If I can find out how RNA started on Earth, then perhaps this is how life could have started. And that means that we have, first of all, to look at what is RNA made of. And RNA is made of a backbone, which is made of phosphates and sugars, and then four nucleobases, which for short are called C, G, A, and U, standing for, cytosine and so on. So these are the names of those, and they have all the information. All the information is in those nuclear bases. So the question is then, how do you make these three components, phosphates, sugars, and these nuclear bases? Now, it turns out phosphates is not a big problem because on the early Earth, there definitely were phosphates already around. So the question really is how to make the sugars and how to make those nuclear bases. Now, in what follows, I will introduce a little bit of biochemistry. Uh, some of you may be a bit rusty on your biochemistry, so I don't expect you to look at all the precise chemical reactions. I will just try to give you what are the basic principles that are at work there. Just as an amusing aside, it turns out that the initial molecules that we think started life are molecules that today are considered either very powerful poisons like cyanide or formaldehyde, or have a very bad smell like hydrogen sulfide, which is, what gives rotten eggs their smell. So life somehow started with that. Why with these? I'll tell you why. Because the nuclear bases, they have in them the combination of carbon and nitrogen, and these molecules, the cyanide and so on, has already carbon and nitrogen in it, so this is what helps it do its thing. So we need this cyanide, this CN combination, carbon, nitrogen. And the way we think that happened on Earth was that there was hydrogen cyanide in the air, and that rained onto the surface. Then, in the surface, all kinds of metals came from within the earth. In particular, in this case, we're talking about iron. And that formed ferrocyanide, which is something that is like a salt that is combining iron with the CN from the hydrogen cyanide. And that salt has the good property that it actually comes out of the solution of water that was on the surface of the earth and makes these layers of salt. It can make these layers of salt at bottoms of lakes and so on. Now, of course, later we had to still free this CN from its ferrocyanide, from the iron. And to do that, you need heat. And that's the reason why we think that early life probably started in volcanically active areas where you could have, it's hot there and there are lava flows that when they flow over, the lava flows over the surface, it can actually release the CN from its ferrocyanide. Now, here is one thing where I don't need you to look precisely at what is written here, but I want to give you the principle, and that is the following. I told you that RNA is made of a backbone that has sugars and phosphates, and then there is this nucleobase. Now, one temptation may be, okay, so maybe the way it formed on the early Earth is that the sugar, ribose, combined with a nucleobase, and then later phosphate was added to that. Well, researchers tried to do that, and it doesn't work. They couldn't make the sugar and the nucleobase combine chemically and do what was needed. Instead, what they found was that you can form some intermediate molecules that are called 2AO. 2AO stands for 2-aminohexazole, and RAO in particular, which is ribosaminoxazoline. And those then intermediates, they can then give you what you need. So instead of taking two building blocks, putting them together, you instead form some intermediate, which then gives you what you need. So that is this idea. And RAO, it turns out, has this additional advantage that it crystallizes. So if you had this water and in it were all these chemical reactions happening, RAO could crystallize, and these crystals could get out of the solution and again accumulate in layers, and then those layers could be further activated. Now, this is slightly more complicated, but again, I will give you simply the idea. So you have this crystalline RAO, which is a good step, I said, because it's a good intermediate. And then you can add to it something like it's what is marked here as HCCN, which is cyanoacetylene, doesn't matter what it is. And it creates a molecule that looks a little bit like what you need, but it's the wrong type of, it has the wrong shape. It's a little bit more like a mirror image of what you need. And the fact that it's a mirror image doesn't help you. So how do you get out of this? People tried for years to try to convert this molecule into the one that you actually need. Eventually, what they discovered is that if you add hydrogen, sulfuric hydrogen to this, it actually does something interesting. The sulfur replaces the oxygen there. Now, this sounds like a bad idea because not only you still have the wrong geometry, namely the mirror image, but in fact, you instead of having oxygen there, you have sulfur. But then it turned out that if you irradiate these molecules with ultraviolet radiation, which is marked here by the H at the bottom, then it flips the molecule to the correct configuration, and then it turns out it's really not difficult to replace back the sulfur with the oxygen. So just notice here that what was needed was the sulfur and the UV radiation. This is why this entire cycle is called the cyanosulfidic photoredox chemistry, because it uses the cyanide, the sulfur, and then the ultraviolet radiation. Let me give you a partial bottom line. I told you that there are 4 nucleobases, 4 nucleotides from which RNA is made. CUGNA. Out of those, researchers now found ways how 2 of those, C and U, can be formed precisely from the conditions that we think existed on the early Earth. So 2 out of the 4 nucleobases could have formed on the early Earth with the conditions existing. You may ask, okay, what about the other 2? Well, people are working on that intensively. They have still not managed, but there doesn't appear to be a showstopper in all of that, and they hope that they will find a way how to make the other 2 nucleobases that form RNA. Next, they found something else. The proteins that are in life are made out of 20 building blocks that are called amino acids. There are 20 amino acids that form all the proteins that form life. The same precise chemistry that makes C and U was found to also make 12 out of the 20 amino acids, which means we are more than halfway there. The same initial conditions on the Earth that we think existed on the early Earth, we know how they could form 2 out of the nucleobases, 12 out of the 20 amino acids that form proteins. This still leaves one thing, and that is, in order to have a cell, you also need to have a membrane, that surrounds the cell. Now, why do you need a membrane at all? Why do we need to have cells? Why could life not have started without having these closed cells? Well, there are two main reasons. One is the cell allowed all the components to stay where they need to be instead of just floating away and dissolving somewhere and so on. That's one thing. But the second thing is even more important. It was needed for to have Darwinian evolution, I mean at the molecular level, not to species. What does that mean? Darwinian evolution means that you continuously improve things, and those that are best fitted, they are the ones that survive. Now, if you don't have cells, suppose that you have, an RNA that now works better, a little bit better as an enzyme, as a protein enzyme. Well, if you don't have a cell, then these molecules get diffused where you are, and you cannot really use them for to get the best benefits from that. If you have it all in a compartment, then these things can feed themselves and you get better. So you need to form these membrane walls that form the cells. Now, the membrane walls, when you look at today's cells, they are made of some fatty things, called lipids, and they are quite complicated. So the original one was probably a much simpler type of wall. It turns out, however, that even making this wall, while relatively easy, the simplest walls that you can make are such that they don't hold things for very long. Very quickly, things can pass through them. And that means that if you allow everything to pass in and out, then you lose this business of doing the Darwinian revolution. So evolution, sorry, not revolution, evolution. So you need somehow for these walls to do need to be able to transport things, because this is what cells do. They transport, things are not needed out and things that they are needed in and so on, but they need to have some time to work on those. And it turns out that raindrops, which really means in the lab distilled water, actually can help with that, because they manage to enhance the resistance of the walls of these lipid walls uh, to transport things, at least to hold it there for a while, enough for this Darwinian evolution to work. So I now give you the real bottom line of this whole thing. What we found is that from the conditions on the early Earth, RNA, well, at the moment, 2 out of the 4 nucleobases, but also the sugars, proteins, 12 out of the 20 amino acids, and the lipid precursors, they all can be formed from the same chemistry that we know existed on the early Earth. So we are really more than halfway there, and there is no showstopper as far as we can tell. Some of you may have heard about the famous experiment by Miller-Urey decades ago, where what they did was they put in a glass tube. Here is actually their actual experiment. They put some gases that they thought represented the early Earth atmosphere, and they passed some electric sparks through it, trying to mimic lightning. And they found that they generated lots of amino acids or amino acid precursors and so on. And this was being regarded as if this means that starting life on Earth was very easy. While it is true that the Miller-Urey experiment acted as an inspiration for many research in the origin of life, we know today that the result that they obtained was actually not helpful, First of all, I mean, they guessed wrong about the atmosphere, the composition of the atmosphere of the early Earth, which we now know much better. But second, what is really needed is very high concentrations of a few key molecules rather than thousands of molecules that most of which are really not helping at all. So this is the results of the Miller-Urey really did not show that life was very easy. They did not show that at all. The same, by the way, is true. A couple of years ago, this asteroid was found, asteroid Bennu, and they found in it lots of sort of amino acids and things, and was saying, there were newspaper articles saying, aha, great, this means that you could start life and so on. No, you couldn't. Uh, you don't need thousands of small quantities of amino acids or any other life molecules. You need very high concentrations of a few key ones. When did life on Earth start? Um, there is strong evidence that life started in these things called stromatolites, which show this layered of sort of kind of bacteria. And it started about 3.5 billion years ago. Every few years, there is a suggestion that maybe somebody found life much earlier than that. Usually, but not, it doesn't mean that it will always be like this. It is found later that those were not was not really life, but some other things. Um, I just remind you that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. We see the first evidence of life about 3.5 billion years ago. Where did life start on Earth? Again, many accounts in still many books, even, and certainly newspaper articles, would try to convince you that life started at hydrothermal vents deep under the ocean. I will say that we argue that that is not possible. In fact, and there are many reasons for that. It is true that near these hydrothermal vents today, there are lots of life forms, but that doesn't mean that life started there. And why do we think that it didn't start there? First of all, there is no plausible path that has been demonstrated for molecules of life to form there. Second, I told you many times now that you need high concentrations. You cannot get that at the bottom of the sea. Everything gets diluted. And also you need this ultraviolet radiation, which there was copious amount of it from the early sun, but that radiation doesn't reach the bottom of the ocean. So where do we think life started? Actually in smaller ponds and lakes, where you could have a large variety of concentration mechanisms, like wet dry cycles on the sides of this pond, freeze thaw, which also concentrates things, evaporation, which also concentrates things, crystallization, as I pointed out about RAO, and of course they have access to the UV radiation. In particular, alkaline carbonate lakes or crater lakes, we think are best for this. This is where we think things probably started. This finishes what I wanted to say about life on Earth, and I will now move to searches for life in other places. So one place where we looked a lot and are still looking is Mars, our nearest planet. Mars, we once thought that when I was a child, people even thought that there is a whole civilization there. We now know that it just looks like a dry desert, and it hardly has any atmosphere at all. It just has a whiff of carbon dioxide, and that's it. But there is no water on the surface today, but we know that there was water on the surface of Mars about 4 billion years ago. We see lots of evidence for that. Here is just one of them where water was flowing on the surface of Mars. So it is very possible that life started on Mars some 4 billion years ago, but then later it didn't further evolve because Mars is a smaller planet. It lost its heat, it lost its atmosphere, and so on. So life couldn't evolve. We know that there is still water underneath the surface, some 6 to 10 miles deep, from this InSight lander that basically measures seismic activity, and we found that there is liquid water a few miles down. So, at one point we will look for that. Some of you may remember that there were two Viking landers that landed on Mars early on, and there were even experiments that were interesting. That they scooped some ground from the surface of Mars, uh, combined it with some nutrient, and they appeared to show some metabolism. But then searches for any organics in that Earth material, Mars material, did not find any signs of that. So today, I would say most researchers think that the Viking experiments did not discover life on Mars. There were big stories. I mean, they made it even into a White House declaration about this meteorite, ALH 84001. This meteorite was thrown from the surface of Mars by the heat of some, asteroid or something on the surface of Mars. Um, it moved through space. So it was hit off the surface some 4 billion years ago or something, and then moved through space. And eventually, after moving through space, it landed up in Antarctica. And it was found that it had some structures that were at first interpreted as if these were signs of life. Later, it was found that pure chemical abiotic, namely non-biotic processes could actually form those structures. So again, we don't think now that showed any signs of life, that meteorite. There is this rock which shows some signs of organic. The Perseverance rover, which took here its own selfie, is there in that region, and it took some samples. And if those are brought to Earth eventually, we will have to look. We will be able to look at them more carefully and find out what's going on with that. I will tell you that my personal opinion is that if we don't find any signs eventually of early life on Mars, not life today, life that existed 4 billion years ago, I think that would be actually surprising because, Mars and Earth form from roughly the same uh, region of the disk that surrounded the early sun. And so it is very likely that life might have started on Mars, even if it hasn't evolved. Okay, Venus. Venus, for many years, we thought that there cannot be any life on Venus because Venus is very hot. In fact, it's so hot that on its surface, lead would melt. But in the past 4 years or so, there were suggestions that in the upper atmosphere of Venus, they found the presence of this molecule called phosphine and also ammonia. Now, phosphine on Earth is created by life processes. So, if true, this can be interesting. Um, Although, I mean, there are processes other than life that also can form phosphine. Now, the good news here is that there are a few missions planned to go to Venus, and actually even probes to go through Venus's atmosphere. And they will tell us more about, first of all, whether the detection is real, And, are there any processes that could form some form, of course, of primitive life in the atmosphere of Venus? I already mentioned the Jupiter itself, which is a gaseous planet. Here, look how its atmosphere looks from up close. Cannot support life, but it has moons, many moons that perhaps can. Europa is one of them. We have strong evidence that Europa, well, on its surface, it has a very thick layer of ice, miles deep layer of ice, but underneath that ice, there is a big ocean, actually, of liquid water underneath the surface. Now, I already told you that we don't think life started in liquid oceans, but liquid oceans can support life, maintain life once started. So, for example, if 4 billion years ago a rock was knocked off the surface of Mars with some life forms in it, and that actually flew to Europa, it's possible that life was sustained there. So this is why it is important to look. And the Europa Clipper, which was launched, uh, is supposed to arrive to the Jupiter system around 2030, and it will continue to explore Europa and a few other moons. Saturn, also like Jupiter, is a gaseous planet, so it doesn't have life on its own, but it has a few moons that are very interesting. One is Enceladus. Enceladus not only has a large ocean underneath its thick layer of ice, but we have seen plumes coming out of Enceladus, which means that there are cracks in that ice. And that is very helpful because it means that we may not have to dig through that ice, but rather it is enough that a spacecraft flies through the plumes, as has already at some level happened, and determine very accurately their composition and see if there are any organics there. And it appears that there are some things there, organics. Again, this is not where life we think started, but where maybe it can be maintained. Titan is another moon of Saturn, and it is a very exciting, intriguing moon because, in addition to having a liquid water ocean underneath its icy surface, on its surface, it actually has lakes, but lakes not of water, but of liquid methane. Uh, and that allows, in principle, for the possibility of even two types of life forms. One, life as we know it in the water underneath, and one for life as we don't know it in the liquid methane on the surface. However, I wouldn't hold my breath for life in this liquid methane because the temperature is extraordinarily low, and it is virtually impossible to have any interesting chemistry in that. But it is still exciting, and there was once a plan by NASA to land something like a boat on one of these lakes. That particular plan is no longer in effect, but one day we may study those lakes. I now move on to outside the solar system in our galaxy, and we know that there is lots of star formation. Here is just one image of by the James Webb Space Telescope, how new stars are being born in clouds of gas and dust. This is the famous Eagle Nebula, again, clouds of gas and dust, inside which this is how new stars are formed. This is the same Eagle Nebula, only seen by the James Webb Space Telescope, and because it looks in infrared, actually much of the dust becomes transparent, and so you can see through some of these columns of gas and dust. We have known for quite a while from Hubble observations that many young stars have around them these disks of dust and gas, which are precisely the same things from which our own solar system formed, namely the planets formed from these dusty disks around young stars. With the James Webb Space Telescope, we find also, we see early stages in planet formation, and that is all very good. Now, here is the fantastic progress that has been made. Until 1992, we didn't know of a single planet outside the solar system, not one. In 92, we discovered some planets, but they were around pulsars. Pulsars are these very, very dense objects, and we don't think that formed in supernova explosions, and we don't think that there could be life on those planets. But in 95, we discovered the first planet around a sun-like star, and since then, we've discovered more than 6,100 extrasolar planets revolving around stars other than the sun. And, if you take that and do the statistics for the whole galaxy, then in our own galaxy, there can be hundreds of millions and maybe a billion planets that are a bit like Earth. I mean, not all like Earth, but planets that revolve around stars that are not too different from the sun, again, up to maybe a billion. And this allows us to do very interesting things. In particular, the following thing, what is called transit spectroscopy, which means if you have a star and you have a planet revolving around it, then sometimes our line of sight is such that the planet exactly goes in front of the star from our point of view. When that happens, the light from the star passes through the atmosphere of the planet on its way to us, and then we can do spectroscopy of that and determine the composition of the atmosphere of that planet. And if we do that with enough accuracy, which we are getting there with the James Webb Space Telescope, and especially with the next generation of such telescopes, then we can actually determine whether there are biosignatures, meaning molecules that indicate the potential presence of life there. And that is, what we're doing. In particular, there is a TRAPPIST-1 system, which has 7 planets, a bit like Earth, also a few of them in what we call the habitable zone, which means the distance from the star that allows for liquid water to be on the surface, which we think is something required for life. And in particular, one of those, TRAPPIST-1e, may have an atmosphere with nitrogen and methane. We say now no carbon dioxide. This is just an artist's impression. So we're starting to get there. There's been another exoplanet that has made some noise in the media, K2-18b, which showed dimethyl sulfide, which again on Earth is created by life processes, although that's not the only way to create that. So we don't know yet whether this is a sign. I'll just mention in passing that some of you may have heard about the Drake equation, which tried to give the probability of having a civilization somewhere in the Milky Way. The astronomical factor in these equations, probability factors, we now know from astronomy, but all the remaining factors that have to do with whether life develops or not and so on are really unknown. So this equation does nothing more than just exemplify our ignorance. Now, of course, there are many galaxies. So if you look at the universe, there are lots of galaxies. This is the James Webb Deep Field. the estimate now is that in our observable universe, there can be about 2 trillion galaxies. So you have to ask yourself, okay, so people tell me, oh, so 2 trillion galaxies, and each one of them has maybe 100 billion, or maybe even a trillion. Sorry, maybe 100 million, or maybe even a billion of planets. So of course there must be life somewhere. No, unfortunately, not of course. And why do I say that? Because at the moment we actually don't have a clue of what is the probability for life to emerge, even if all the conditions are there, because we only have one example of life so far, and that is the Earth. So since we don't know that, if we have 10 to the 20 planets like Earth and so on, how do we know that the probability of life emerging is not smaller than 10 to the minus 20? So we cannot actually answer that. Dyson spheres are the ideas that if you have an intelligent civilization, it may build structures to collect the energy from its central star. We have not seen yet signs to that. How what would a distant civilization look like? Well, they cannot hide the fact that they have to have waste heat, which would be observed in mid-infrared. WISE Observatory looked at 100,000 galaxies, found 5 that have strange mid-infrared emission. This is something that I could talk on for a long time, but I wouldn't. And that is that maybe biological evolution is just a very brief phase in this, because sooner or later we are being replaced by machines. And we have started to see something along this direction with AI. So it is possible that, okay, maybe not in 5 years, maybe not in 10 years, maybe not even in 100 years, but can you actually tell that in 1 million years, which is nothing compared to evolution, Darwinian evolution, that in 1 million years, the dominant species will not be a machine? If that is the case, then the way we are looking now may actually be inappropriate. And so the bottom line is, at the moment, I actually cannot answer the question whether life is an inevitable outcome or a freak accident that happened on Earth. There are 2 things that I want to finish with. One is very important. You see, you may get depressed from the fact that, okay, there may be 1 billion Earth-like places in the Milky Way, and there are maybe 2 trillion galaxies. So our physical existence has become, over the years, more and more insignificant. However, here is the thing. You see, all the elements in our bodies were actually forged at the centers of stars. In the Big Bang, there was only hydrogen and helium and trace amounts of other things. All the other things, carbon, oxygen, iron, and so on, were formed in stars. And then eventually there were either supernova explosions or a planetary nebulae, slower ejection of outer layers, and from that planets formed and eventually life formed. In other words, not only are we in the universe is inside us. So we have an intimate connection to the universe. And in that sense, we are, not only that, everything I described was discovered by us. By us, I mean humans, yes? So in that sense, we are very central to our universe, because the universe, we found the universe expanding just in the rate that our knowledge has expanded. So in that sense, we are central. And I will finish with this. Philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote once, 2 things awe me most: the starry sky above me and the moral law within me. If I change that phrase to more modern terms, I would say that there are three origins that we're trying to explain. One is the origin of the universe, the other is the origin of life, and the other origin of consciousness. Now, we have made lots of progress in understanding the origin of the universe. We know that the universe started from a hot, dense state, which we call the Big Bang. I showed in this talk that we have made a lot of progress in understanding the origin of life. We're not yet there. I mean, there are many questions remaining, but we've made lots of progress. We've made somewhat less progress in understanding the origin of consciousness, even though there is progress there as well. There are now, at least four leading theories of how consciousness happens. We still don't know whether consciousness is an emergent property, which means that in any complex enough system, eventually consciousness appears, or not. And this makes a big difference. But people are starting to test these kinds of ideas as well. So I will finish here and remind you that this is based on this book, Is Earth Exceptional? The Quest for Cosmic Life? And I will take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your brilliant and informative and inspiring lecture. I would like to express my sincere gratitude for you for sharing such profound insights, which made us really think broader. So I think this has left us many interesting questions as well related to habitable planets and occurrence of life itself. Let us take a few such questions now. Yes, first question, please. So this question is from Om from VNIT Nagpur, India. So he's asking, why do Earth, Mars, and closer to Sun have less number of moons, while Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus have large number of moons? Is there any reason for this?
Yes, there are reasons. I mean, typically, first of all, the number of moons also scales somewhat with the size of the planet, because if you had more material in that area, you could form the planet and you could form its moons. Earth is, 1,000 times smaller than Jupiter, so there was much less material when it formed. The moon that we have was actually formed by the fact that a Mars-sized object collided with Earth and tore a piece of it, and that's what formed our moon. Otherwise, we would not even have had a moon.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for letting us know that. Can we have next question, please? This is from Professor Tejinder Singh. He is from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, India. His question is, what physical principle favors formation of RNA molecule or just having separate components, sugar, phosphate, and bases? Is it because the molecule has negative binding energy? Also, what physical principle causes a cell to divide as DNA to replicate? Thank you.
Yeah, so, I cannot answer this, with lots of knowledge. I mean, the thing is that life did not have, in principle, to start with RNA. In fact, lab experiments show that there are other molecules that could have acted perhaps even better than RNA. However, it turns out that when they try to do those molecules in the lab, at least, then RNA seems to win in the sense that it is both replicating faster and more resistant to being destroyed. And this is what appears to be make RNA win in these types of situation. So there isn't one fundamental physical principle. It's a series of, if you like, filters that somehow at the end favor RNA over different types of structures.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, can we have next question on screen, please? It is from Pradeep Kumar from Kendriya Vidyalaya, Sangathan, India. With due respect and sincere thanks for your valuable insights, I humbly wish to ask, based on the theoretical frameworks you discussed, to what extent has modern science been able to successfully replicate the transition from prebiotic chemistry to self-sustaining biological life?
So only partially. The answer is only partially. As I said, for the moment, we can do 2 out of the 4 nucleobases, 12 out of the 20 um, amino acids, and some very, very simple lipids. This still leaves a lot of work to be done, but it does appear to show that it is possible, and but it may be very rare, and indeed, in most cases, it may not succeed, and we may be one of those rare cases where the process succeeded. So I cannot say that we have proved, almost like in a mathematical sense, that life started from abiotic chemistry. But all I can say is that we showed that there are pathways that perhaps life could have gone in that. Even if we succeed when I say we, I personally don't work in the lab with that. I'm a theoretical astrophysicist, but Jack Shostak and his colleagues, if they succeed in making at the end, a living cell in the lab, it doesn't necessarily mean that life on Earth started exactly like that. It just shows that that is a plausible path. So, to speak in mathematical terms, it is like an existence theorem. It doesn't prove that this is how things actually worked.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I hope it has helped us a bit. This is a question from Kumar Ravi from Swami Vivekananda University, Barkpur, West Bengal, India. So in the context of the origin of life, we often think of a transition from inorganic chemistry to organic molecules arising, perhaps accidentally, through natural process. The Miller-Urey experiment is a classical example demonstrating this step. Could you highlight other key experiments in roughly chronological order that have significantly shaped our current understanding of how life may have originated? Also, are these developments discussed in detail in your book?
Yes. So, look, I would say that, in my opinion, 2 of the most productive researchers who have made a big difference um, in um, in this origin of life experiments are Sutherland in the UK and Shostak, my co-author, in the US. But of course, there have been many others, and I pointed out the really monumental discovery of Czech and Altman, that led to and Leslie Orgel also, who led to the idea of the RNA world, which is crucial in our current understanding. And yes, all of these things are described in our book.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I hope this helped him, and maybe he will go through the book as well. Last question for current talk. It is again from Dr. Bharat Pandey, Government PG College, Raniket, India. He's asking, sir, I want to ask if phosphine and ammonia are detected in Venus's atmosphere, how can we distinguish whether they come from unknown chemical process or possible microbial life?
So you're right. I mean, so we have to make sure that they have really been detected. This would be because there have been some questions about the detection itself. But like I said, there are 3 missions planned for the atmosphere of Venus. So we will know that part. Then we will have to see whether there are any other uh, chemical compounds or things that can show that this is part of some sort of a life process, or just, the fact that it was formed via non-biological processes. So really, I think we're in a very good situation in the sense that there are these missions planned. So unlike in cases of extrasolar planets where they are very hard to really research, in this case, we will have a whole series of experiments that will clarify the situation about Venus. To be honest, I'm not holding my breath about life on Venus, but it is very interesting nonetheless.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful question and answer session. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of Bhaktivedanta Institute and all the audience, I would like to once again express our sincere gratitude to you for sharing your wonderful insights and profound knowledge on interesting and intriguing topic, is Earth exceptional? So we hope all the audience have gained some insights about inhabitable planets and existence of life itself, occurrence of life itself. So with this, thank you, sir. Thank you once again. And we hope to see you again for future events.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.